At 1:47 on a Thursday morning, the motion sensor inside my detached workshop sent a silent alert to the phone beside my bed. I was awake before the screen finished glowing. At 68, sleep had become a lighter thing than it used to be, especially in the house I had shared with my wife for 41 years before cancer took her. I reached for the phone, opened the camera feed, and watched my son-in-law step through a door that had been locked every night for 9 years. Connor Doyle moved slowly at first, one hand still resting on the handle, the other holding a small black garage remote I had never given him. He looked over his shoulder toward the dark yard, waited 5 seconds, then shut the door behind him. He believed he had just outsmarted an old widower. He believed the workshop held the one piece of paper that could save his failing business. What he did not know was that I had discovered his extra remote 3 days earlier. I could have deleted it from the opener in less than a minute. I could have called my daughter. I could have changed every lock on the property and ended the whole thing before it began. Instead, I had driven 6 miles into town, placed the real documents inside my attorney's safe, returned home, and left one envelope in the center drawer of my workbench. I had even written the words, "Lake Parcel, Original" across the front in block letters large enough for a desperate man to read from 3 feet away. Then I waited. If you're a father, a grandfather, or anyone who has ever watched somebody confuse your kindness with permission, you already understand why I needed to know what Connor would do when no one was there to stop him. Curiosity can be forgiven. A bad decision can be confronted. But intent is different. Intent tells you who someone is when they believe you are too old, too trusting, or too tired to notice. On the camera, Connor walked past my late wife's cedar chest without looking at it. He ignored the shelves of hand tools, the fishing rods, the old framed photographs, even the 1968 Johnson outboard motor I had been restoring with my grandson. He went directly to the desk. That was when I knew there had never been any curiosity at all. He knew exactly what he was looking for. He opened the top drawer, moved 2 folders aside, found the envelope, and smiled. Not a relieved smile. Not the nervous smile of a man who had crossed a line and was already regretting it. It was the small, satisfied smile of someone who believed the difficult part was over. He took out his phone and photographed every page. Then he folded the papers once, put them inside his coat, closed the drawer, and left. The whole visit lasted 7 minutes and 16 seconds. I did not move from my bed until his headlights disappeared down County Road 6. Then I sat on the edge of the mattress, looking at the empty side where my wife, Evelyn, used to sleep, and said quietly, "Well, Evie, now I know." 9 years earlier, the workshop had become the one room on my property nobody entered without me. Before Evelyn died, it had been ours. I was a county building inspector in Northwest Michigan for 34 years, and she restored antique furniture for local families, summer homeowners, and anyone willing to wait for work done properly. The workshop smelled like pine dust, linseed oil, machine grease, and the lavender hand cream she kept near the sink because cold weather cracked her fingers. We spent more evenings out there than we did watching television. She would refinish a sideboard while I rebuilt a boat trailer hub or sharpened chisels, and we could work in silence for an hour without either of us feeling ignored. After she died, I locked the side door and started carrying the key on my ring. I told everyone the same thing. That room is mine. Ask before you go in. My daughter Emily understood. She was 38 then, teaching 2nd grade in Traverse City, raising 2 children, and grieving her mother in ways that did not always look like grief. Connor understood too, at least at first. He had married Emily 6 years before Evelyn got sick, and for a long time I liked him. He could be funny. He was good with the kids when he wanted to be. He ran a small residential renovation company and had enough practical skill that we could talk about roof pitch, foundation drainage, and bad framing choices without either of us getting bored. The trouble began slowly, which is how most family trouble begins. Nobody wakes up one morning and announces that respect is over. It disappears an inch at a time. Connor borrowed my utility trailer and returned it with a bent jack. He used my contractor account for materials without asking because, as he put it, "We all save money if I use your pricing." He began sending employees to my house to borrow tools after I had told him I did not want strangers in the workshop. Then came the money. First it was $5,000 for a payroll gap, then another $8,000 for a supplier dispute. Then he asked if I would co-sign a commercial line of credit. I said no. He smiled and said he understood, but something changed after that. He started talking about my assets the way contractors talk about unused square footage. The house was too much place for one person. The lake frontage was sitting there doing nothing. The workshop was a valuable structure that could be converted into a rental. The first time he said that, Emily told him to stop. He laughed. I'm just thinking long term. I remember looking at him and answering, long term for whom? He did not answer. The lake parcel was the part he became most interested in. My property sat on 11 wooded acres above Grand Traverse Bay, but the shoreline itself was complicated. Years earlier, Evelyn and I had purchased an adjoining 2-acre strip after an elderly neighbor moved south. That strip included 80 feet of waterfront and an access lane. We had never built on it. We left it as trees, wild grass, and a place where our grandchildren could skip stones. Developers had approached us more than once. The answer was always no. After Evelyn died, I transferred the parcel into a living trust with Emily as future beneficiary, but I kept full control while I was alive. Connor knew the rough outline, but not the details. What he did know was that a regional development group had recently purchased land 2 properties down and wanted a continuous access corridor for a cluster of luxury homes. Without my strip, their plan was awkward and expensive. With it, the project became much easier. One afternoon in May, Connor mentioned casually that the developer might pay crazy money for an easement. I told him I was not interested. He said, "You don't even use that side." I said, "I use it by choosing not to sell it." He rolled his eyes. That was the first moment I saw something in him I did not like. Not anger, entitlement. The idea that my decision required his approval. By August, Connor's company was in trouble. I learned this gradually, not because he told me, but because people talk in small towns and construction leaves paperwork everywhere. A supplier I had known for 20 years asked whether Connor was still good for a balance. A subcontractor said he had stopped getting paid on time. Then Emily called me one Sunday night and asked, too casually, if I knew any banks that might refinance a business loan. I asked how bad it was. She went quiet. He says temporary. I heard children laughing somewhere behind her and kept my voice even. Emily, are you personally on any of those debts? She said no, then after a pause added, not that I know of. That answer stayed with me. 2 weeks later, Connor came by while I was replacing a cracked board on the workshop ramp. He stood with his hands in his pockets and watched me work. You know, he said, if you granted that access easement, you could get maybe 400,000. Maybe more. I kept driving the screw. Still no. He kicked lightly at a pile of sawdust. You'd never notice it. I looked up. Then why do you notice it so much? He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Because I understand opportunity, I said, and I understand pressure. They're different things. He changed the subject. 3 days later, I noticed the workshop door had a faint crescent-shaped scratch around the lock, the kind made by someone inserting a key carelessly in low light. I stood there, staring at it for a long time. Emily had a house key but not a workshop key. Connor had never had one. My grandson Tyler did not even know where I kept the spare. I checked the camera log. No entry. Then I remembered the garage opener. The workshop had a roll-up door I used for the fishing boat, controlled by 2 remotes. One in my truck and one in a kitchen drawer. I opened the opener panel and counted paired transmitters. 3. There were supposed to be 2. I did not panic. 34 years inspecting buildings taught me that when something does not match the record, you do not make up an explanation. You document it. I called the manufacturer, confirmed that a 3rd remote had been programmed 12 days earlier, and asked whether they could tell me the exact date and time. They could. Tuesday, 4:26 p.m. I checked my calendar. That was the afternoon Connor and Emily had brought the grandkids over while I grilled burgers. At 4:20, Emily and I had been outside watching Tyler show me a new fishing lure. Connor had gone inside to use the bathroom. I sat at the kitchen table with that information for nearly an hour. My first impulse was to call Emily. My second was to drive to Connor's house and demand the remote. But both would answer only one question, whether I could stop him. I already knew I could stop him. What I needed to know was why he wanted access badly enough to create a secret way in. So I called my attorney, Susan Keller. Susan had handled Evelyn's estate, my trust, and enough property disputes to know that family trouble gets uglier when people rely on memory instead of records. I told her everything. Her first response was simple: move every original document. That afternoon I took the trust papers, deed, survey, easement correspondence, and the only signed rejection letter from the developer to her office. She scanned them, logged them, and put the originals in her safe. Then I showed her a draft I had prepared. It looked like an easement option agreement, but it was not legally operative. The parcel number on page 2 contained one transposed digit. The document code at the bottom read HN471B, a code Susan and I invented. The compensation amount was listed as $485,000. Enough money to tempt someone desperate. Susan looked at me over her glasses. You are not trying to trick him into committing a crime. No, I said. I'm trying to learn whether he is already trying to use my property without me. She nodded. Then do not encourage him. Do not contact a developer. Do not make promises. You can leave your own paper in your own locked building. If he takes it or sends it, that's his decision. I bought a basic motion camera from a farm supply store, nothing covert or complicated, and mounted it in plain view under the rafters. I put a magnetic contact sensor on the side door and enabled logging on the garage opener. Then I placed the decoy envelope in the workbench drawer. That night, for the first time in years, I hoped I was wrong. After Connor entered the workshop, I did nothing for 48 hours. That was harder than it sounds. On Friday afternoon, Emily called to ask if I wanted to come over Sunday for dinner. Her voice was normal. She told me Tyler had made the middle school soccer team. She complained that her daughter Grace refused to wear anything except the same purple sweatshirt. Then she said, Connor's been stressed, but I think things are finally turning around. My grip tightened on the phone. I asked, what makes you say that? She hesitated. He said he may have found a new investor. I closed my eyes. Did he say who? No. Dad. Why? I looked through my kitchen window toward the workshop. Nothing. Just asking. I hated lying to her by omission, but I hated more the idea of accusing her husband without knowing how far he had gone. Saturday morning, Susan called. You need to come in. I was at her office 20 minutes later. She turned her monitor toward me. An attorney representing Bay North Development had forwarded her an email received from Connor at 8:12 Friday morning. The subject line read, Private Access Opportunity. Connor had written that he was assisting family with disposition planning and believed he could secure an easement across my lake parcel quickly if the developer increased its offer. Attached was a photograph converted to PDF. The file showed the decoy agreement from my workshop. At the bottom was our invented document code, HN471B. I stared at it without speaking. Susan let me read Connor's email twice. He had not merely taken a photo. He had represented himself as someone with authority over my property. He had told the developer there was family consensus. He had also written, the owner is elderly and increasingly willing to simplify. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because of the word elderly. I was 68. I had gray hair, 2 replaced knees, and reading glasses in every room. Age was a fact. What hurt was the strategy behind it. He was making my age part of his sales pitch. Susan said, Bay North's lawyer got uncomfortable because Connor is not on title and contacted me after a record search showed the trust. I nodded. Good. She studied my face. Henry, this is enough to confront him. It may also be enough for further action if he forged, altered, or represented authority he does not have, but we do this carefully. I said, I want Emily there. Susan said, then show her facts, not conclusions. That afternoon I printed 4 things. The garage opener pairing record, the camera still of Connor standing at my desk, the image of him placing the envelope inside his coat, and the email Bay North had forwarded. I put them in a plain folder and drove home. I did not sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Emily at 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders during the Cherry Festival parade. Emily at 17, crying because she had backed Evelyn's station wagon into the mailbox. Emily at 32, holding newborn Grace, while Connor stood beside her looking terrified and proud. A father spends decades building a story about the people his children choose. You want to believe that even when they are flawed, they are safe. You want to believe your daughter is not sleeping beside someone who measures her father's vulnerability in dollars. By Sunday morning, I knew the confrontation could not be about winning. It had to be about truth. I arrived at Emily's house at 4:30 carrying a blueberry pie because I could not bear the idea of turning a family dinner into an ambush without at least bringing what I had promised. Tyler opened the door and yelled, "Grandpa," before hugging me around the waist. Grace ran past, wearing the purple sweatshirt. For 15 minutes, I almost convinced myself to wait. Connor stood at the grill in the backyard, beer in one hand, tongs in the other, acting like the man I remembered liking. He asked about my boat. He joked that I was overcooking burgers. Emily brought out potato salad and kissed my cheek. Ordinary family life can make betrayal feel impossible even when you have photographs in your truck proving it happened. We ate. We talked about school. I listened to Tyler explain a soccer position I did not understand. Then the kids went upstairs to finish homework, and I said, "Emily, Connor, I need 10 minutes with both of you at the table." Connor leaned back. "Sounds serious." I answered, "It is." Emily looked from him to me. "Dad?" I placed the folder between us, but did not open it. I looked at Connor first. "Were you inside my workshop Thursday morning at 1:47? His expression changed so slightly. Another person might have missed it. I had spent 3 decades watching contractors answer questions when they knew a code violation was behind the wall. There is a half second when the mind searches for the safest lie. Connor found his. "No." Emily frowned. "Why would he be in your workshop?" I kept my eyes on him. "I'm asking him." Connor laughed once. "Henry, I wasn't there." I opened the folder and slid the opener record across the table. A third remote was paired August 12th at 4:26 in the afternoon. "You were alone inside my house at that time." Connor glanced at the page. "That doesn't prove anything." "You're right." I slid over the camera, still showing him entering the workshop. Emily's mouth opened. Connor's face hardened. "You have cameras on me?" "I have a camera in my locked workshop." He looked at Emily. "This is insane." I added the next image, the envelope in his hand. "Tell her what you took." Connor pushed the photograph back. "I didn't take anything. I looked at a document because I was worried you were making financial decisions without understanding the implications." Emily stared at him. "You told me you weren't in there." He spoke quickly. "Because your dad is framing this like a burglary." I was trying to help. That was the moment I realized something important. A person can regret being caught without regretting what they did. I said, "Then explain the email." I placed the final pages down. Emily read the first paragraph, then the second. Her face lost color. "Connor, what is this?" He leaned forward. "It's not what it looks like." She tapped the paper with one finger. "It says you told them there was family consensus. I was negotiating. That's how business works." "Whose family consensus?" "Emily, listen to me." "No, whose?" His voice rose. "Your father is sitting on land worth $500,000 while my company is trying to survive. We have 2 kids. We have a mortgage. I was trying to create an option," I said, "with property that isn't yours." He turned on me. "Property Emily inherits eventually." The room went silent. Even Connor seemed to hear the sentence after it left his mouth. Emily stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Eventually?" He rubbed his forehead. "That's not what I meant." She said, "Then tell me what you meant." Connor looked at me, and the resentment he had been hiding for months finally came through. "I meant you're nearly 70, Henry. You don't need 11 acres. You don't need a separate waterfront strip. You don't use half of what you own. Meanwhile, we are drowning because one project went bad and 2 clients stopped paying. I saw a way to fix it. Yes, I copied the remote. Yes, I looked at the paper, but I wasn't stealing from him. I was trying to get a deal moving before he changed his mind again. I said, "I never changed my mind." He stared at me. I continued, "And the paper you photographed wasn't real." His expression emptied. Emily turned toward me. "What?" I said. "The real documents have been in Susan Keller's safe since Tuesday. The one Connor took was a non-binding decoy with an altered parcel number and a tracking code. I put it there after I discovered the unauthorized remote." Connor went pale. You set me up. No. I left paper in my locked workshop. You programmed your own access, entered at 1:47 in the morning, took it, and sent it to a developer, while claiming you represented my interests. Every step after the door was yours. He stood. You wanted me to fail. I shook my head. I wanted you to stop. Emily looked at me then, tears filling her eyes. Dad, why didn't you tell me? That was the hardest question in the room. I answered her honestly, because I needed to know whether he was curious, desperate, or willing to use you to get to me, and because once I accused your husband, I could never take it back. Connor muttered, This is unbelievable. Emily turned on him. What's unbelievable is that you used my father's age in an email to strangers. He said, I was trying to save our family. She answered, By selling part of his? Nobody spoke after that. The weeks that followed were quieter than people imagined consequences to be. There were no police cars racing up my driveway, no dramatic courtroom speech, no federal agents bursting through doors. Real family damage is mostly phone calls, paperwork, silence, and people deciding where they will sleep. Emily asked Connor to stay with his brother while she reviewed the business finances. 2 days later, she called me from her classroom after the students had gone home. She was crying but trying not to sound like it. Dad, I found a home equity application draft on his laptop. My name is on it. I asked, Did you sign it? No. Then stop looking through anything else until you have your own attorney. She did. Her attorney later discovered that Connor had not completed that application, but he had been considering using their house to cover company debt without telling her the full extent of what he owed. He had also borrowed from a private lender at a rate so bad Susan called it panic written as a contract. Bay North Development sent a formal letter stating it would have no further communication with Connor regarding my property. Susan sent Connor a notice that he had no authority to represent me, my trust, or any related parcel. I removed his access to the property, changed the workshop opener, and installed new locks. More importantly, I amended my trust. Emily remained the beneficiary, but any future spouse of hers would have no management authority over the lake parcel, and the land could not be sold for 10 years after my death unless Emily herself initiated the process through an independent trustee. When I told her, she looked ashamed. I stopped her. This isn't punishment for you, she said. It feels like you don't trust my judgment. I said, I trust you enough to protect you from having to prove your marriage by risking something your mother and I built. She cried then, and so did I. 3 months passed before Connor asked to speak with me. We met at a diner off US 31, neutral ground with bad coffee and good pie. He looked older, not humbled in some cinematic way, just tired. He said his company was closing. He had sold 2 trucks and most of his equipment to settle supplier claims. Emily had not decided whether the marriage would survive. He looked at his hands for a long time before saying, I convinced myself I was doing it for them. I asked, When did you start believing my property was part of your rescue plan? He said nothing. I waited. Eventually, he said, When I realized Emily would inherit it, I nodded. That's the answer. He looked up. I know. I said, No, I don't think you do. Inheritance is what someone leaves after a life ends. You started spending mine while I was still here. His eyes filled, but I did not soften the sentence. He said, I'm sorry. I believed he was sorry. I did not know whether he was sorry enough. Those are different things. I told him I would not pursue any claim over the copied document unless further misuse surfaced, but he was not welcome on my property for the foreseeable future. He asked, Ever? I said, That's up to what you do next, not what you say today. The next spring, Emily brought the kids over on a Saturday morning. The snow was finally gone from the shady side of the workshop, and the bay had turned that sharp blue it gets before summer crowds arrive. Tyler wanted to work on the old outboard motor. Grace wanted to paint a birdhouse. Emily stood near the door while I unlocked it, and for a second I saw her look at the key in my hand. You know, she said, Mom would hate all this. I smiled. Your mother hated wasted paint, crooked drawer pulls, and people who put wet glasses on wood. She'd have had plenty to say. Emily laughed, then grew serious. I mean, what happened? I looked around the room. Evelyn's cedar chest was still against the wall. Her clamps hung where she left them. One drawer still contained labels in her handwriting. For 9 years I had kept the room locked because I thought protecting it meant preserving what was gone. Connor taught me something I did not expect. A locked door is not only about keeping people out. Sometimes it is about making clear that entry is a choice, and choices reveal character. I handed Tyler a socket wrench and showed Grace where the paintbrushes were. Emily stayed in the doorway. "Can I come in?" she asked. That question nearly broke me. I said, "You never had to ask because you're my daughter." She shook her head. "I know. I'm asking anyway." So I stepped aside. She walked in, touched the edge of her mother's workbench, and cried quietly for a minute while the kids pretended not to notice. Later, while we ate sandwiches on the ramp, Tyler asked why I had so many locks. I told him, "Locks don't mean you expect everyone to steal. They mean some things deserve permission." He thought about that, then nodded the way 13-year-olds do when they are deciding whether an old man's sentence is wisdom or just another old man's sentence. I looked out toward the trees hiding the lake parcel and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not victory, peace. Connor had walked into my workshop believing the important thing inside was a document worth almost $500,000. He was wrong. The important thing was the boundary itself. The document could be replaced. The land could be surveyed again. Money could be made and lost. What mattered was whether the people I called family understood that loving me did not give them unlimited access to my home, my decisions, my future, or the years I still had left. I did not destroy Connor. I did not need to. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of believing my life had already become somebody else's inheritance. And if you're a father, a grandfather, a husband, or anyone who has spent a lifetime building something others assume they will eventually own, remember this. Generosity is not surrender. Age is not incapacity. And blood does not turn permission into entitlement. Sometimes the strongest thing an older man can do is not slam the door in anger. Sometimes it is to leave the door exactly as it is, step back, and see who chooses to cross it.